If your stitches are still a mess after rethreading it over and over, and you've spun that tension dial up and down and it's not fixing anything, keep watching. I'm going to walk you through the exact tension reset procedure that I use every day in my repair shop to calibrate both your upper and bobbin tension so that you can finally get even balanced stitches every time. I also have a free download that details this entire procedure step by step. It's my Tension Rescue Toolkit. I'll be sure to leave a link to that in the description of this video. So go ahead and grab that if you want, and let's get started. I'm Lisa. I'm a quilter who a couple years ago lost my corporate job and decided to learn to fix sewing machines and start my own repair business. On this channel, I'm sharing videos from my workbench to help you master your sewing machine so you can spend less time troubleshooting and more time actually sewing. Now, if your tension is mostly in balance, but maybe you just need a small adjustment because you're either switching materials or thread weights, or maybe your tension looks fine when you're sewing with cotton, but when you switch to silk, it starts to look a little off, I suggest you go watch this video first. You most likely are just going to need to make a small adjustment to your upper tension. Don't touch your bobbin tension unless absolutely necessary. So I'll make sure that video is linked below as well. However, if you've already tried adjusting that upper tension, or maybe you fiddled with the settings and you just can't seem to get back to a balanced stitch, then keep on watching. What we're going to do here is a full reset. By the time you're done going through this process, your upper and bobbin tension should be calibrated back to a reliable baseline so that any future project-specific adjustments are going to be much more predictable. All right, so sewing machines create a stitch called a lock stitch. So you have a top thread and a bobbin thread, and they create a tiny knot that forms between two layers of fabric. So when your tension's in balance, that knot sits right between the two layers of fabric and you can't see it. But if you imagine a tug of war between these two threads, when they're evenly matched, that knot's right in the middle, right? But if one side of the thread is pulling harder than the other, then that knot can get dragged towards whichever side is winning and pulling the hardest. Now, your upper thread's tension is controlled by your tension dial, or perhaps on some computerized machines, you may have a computer setting to increase or decrease your tension. And what this dial is actually controlling is how much pressure is being applied to the tension discs. So when you thread your machine, the thread passes through these two discs. At least it will thread them if your presser foot is up. If your presser foot is down, those discs stay closed. This is why it's very important to have your presser foot up, because it opens the discs and allows the thread to fall between it. And then when you lower your presser foot, the tension dial or computer setting is telling those tension discs how much pressure to press against the thread going through it. Now, for your bottom thread, the tension is controlled by a small spring in the bobbin case. And every bobbin case is going to have an adjustment screw that controls how much pressure is applied to the thread. So you can see how the adjustments here for the upper and lower tension really need to be incredibly precise in order for the exact right amount of tension to be applied to both threads in order to get a balanced stitch. So here's an example of what a balanced stitch looks like. So the top thread we see is only visible on top, and our bobbin thread is only pulling through to the bottom. That's a balanced stitch. That's the goal. Now, you may see some small points of color from the opposite side peeking through at the very outer edge, especially if you are in a zigzag. That's very normal. It is still considered a balanced stitch. Now, if your threads look like this, a classic bird's nest of looping threads, this is almost always a threading issue. You are either missing a thread guide or you didn't have that presser foot up when you were threading the machine. Again, presser foot up is a non-negotiable. You need that foot up in order to open those tension discs. Otherwise, your thread is never going to get the right amount of pressure applied to it. So absolutely make sure you are threading your machine correctly before going any further. Now, most likely your stitches are somewhere in between, and that means we've got some calibrating to do. So let's keep going. All right, so the first step to properly calibrating our tension is using the proper materials. So even if these aren't the materials you're going to be using in your next project, I want you to start here so that we are getting our tension back to a controlled baseline And once we have that controlled baseline, then again, you can make any minor project-specific adjustments and it's gonna be so much easier. So here's what we're gonna use. We want 2 layers of a nice quality quilting cotton, or a muslin could work in a pinch as long as the weave isn't too loose. We're looking for a nice woven fabric that feeds easily, nothing that stretches or distorts, and something that's going to respond well to a standard needle and thread. And we always test with 2 layers. If you're testing with only 1 layer, your stitch is not going to be able to form properly, and you're going to get wonky results every time. Now for thread, the rules here are that we want to use the same brand and weight in the top and in the bobbin. And this is because different weights respond differently to tension. So again, we're just trying to reduce the variables here. I usually use a 50 weight cotton thread. Quality does matter. I like Gutermann, Orfil's great, Mettler's great. There are other brands, but if you're using like a discount brand, or if it's just an old thread that is brittle and breaks easily, you're going to have tension issues no matter what. So for this test, it is better to use the best quality thread you have available. Now, an additional tip here is if you can, use contrasting colors in the top and bottom, because this is going to make reading and diagnosing your stitches as we go through this process a lot easier. And then for needles, we're going to stick with a universal or microtex needle. Size 12 or 14 is fine, but we're not going to use any jersey, ballpoint, or other specialty needles while we are going through this reset process. And then to set up our stitch, we are going to test with a zigzag stitch. So set your width to either a 4 and a 4.5, and your stitch length to either a 2 or 2.5. Stitch issues present themselves a lot more clearly on a zigzag stitch. Makes it much easier to visualize and diagnose those tension issues, which we will see here in just a moment. So basically what we are going to do here is bring our upper tension to a middle neutral point on the dial, and then we're going to take our bobbin tension and calibrate it to meet the upper tension. If that doesn't make sense yet, that's okay. We're going to walk through it step by step. By the way, this process is the exact one that I learned when I took my training with Sewing Doc Academy. That's where I learned absolutely everything from troubleshooting tension issues to how to actually safely open the plastic covers of modern machines to vintage restoration techniques. So if you are someone who wants to learn how to safely fix your own machines, I really wholeheartedly endorse and recommend this program. I do have a discount code, so if that's something you are interested in, you can find that information linked below as well. So the first step we're going to do here is to set our upper tension dial to the middle setting. So if your machine has numbers, this is typically around a 4. Sometimes there's like a red dot or a line, or it's labeled auto. But there's usually some sort of indication that it is the sort of middle or default setting. Now, this is our anchor for the entire process. From here, we are not going to touch the upper dial again until we're completely done. The upper tension is set. We're now working on the bobbin tension to meet it to bring our upper tension back into balance. Next, grab those 2 layers of cotton and sew a few inches with your zigzag stitch and look at both sides of the fabric. So what are we looking at? Well, if your top thread is pulling to the bottom of the fabric, that tells us the bobbin thread is winning that tug of war. It is pulling too much, and to correct it, we need to decrease the bobbin tension. If, however, we are seeing the bobbin thread pulling to the top of the fabric, that tells us our bobbin tension is now too loose, and we are going to need to increase the bobbin tension. All right, now we are at probably the most important part of the video, so listen up. Here's how to safely and properly adjust your bobbin tension. So to make this bobbin adjustment, we're gonna need to remove our bobbin case and identify the correct adjustment screw. If you have a side loading machine, your bobbin case likely looks something like this. So the correct tension adjustment screw is the one closest to where the thread exits the tension spring. You'll see another one. We are not going to touch that one, leave it completely alone. Now, if you have a top loading machine, you are going to need to remove the needle plate to access the bobbin case. And yes, you're going to need to do this every time you make an adjustment. So when I was first learning, I assumed that if I opened the little plastic lid to where I access the bobbin area, that if I saw a screw on the bobbin case, that it probably is the adjustment screw, right? I assumed, oh, they've made it easily accessible so that I don't have to remove the whole needle plate to make this adjustment. I was wrong. I've spent hours going back and forth, adjusting a screw that wasn't even the adjustment screw. Like it wasn't actually impacting the tension until I think I accidentally took off the entire tension spring on the bobbin case. So definitely don't do that. Fully remove the bobbin case. Make sure you are adjusting the correct screw so that you are not wasting your own time. So now when we make this adjustment, we are making a very small adjustment. We are talking no more than a quarter turn of the screw, or if you think of your screwdriver going in and turning it just 90 degrees. By the way, you're probably going to need to locate a teeny tiny screwdriver that fits your bobbin case. Don't try to use something that isn't a good fit because you really don't want to damage that screw on your bobbin case. Take it slow. Start with only a small adjustment. It is really easy to overshoot, and then again, you're going to end up spending a lot longer chasing that balance stitch than is necessary. So again, look at that test strip you sewed earlier, and if you see that the top thread is visible on the bottom of the fabric, this is telling us the bobbin is too tight. So turn the screw left a quarter of a turn or counterclockwise to loosen the bobbin tension. And if that bottom thread is visible on the top of the fabric, we're going to do the opposite and turn the screw to the right a quarter of a turn. This is clockwise, and this tightens the bobbin tension. It's lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, same as any screw. So after we make our adjustment, we have to put everything back in and test our results. So go ahead, put that needle plate back on. Yes, we do need to actually screw it in every time, which can be tedious. If you don't have one of these stubby screwdrivers, definitely recommend you pick one or two up to add to your sewing kit. Biggest tip here is to not over tighten the screws as you're putting the needle plate back on. I am definitely guilty of making that mistake before and spent a lot of time trying to get out a stripped screw. So use a screwdriver that fits properly and do not over tighten it when you are putting it back on. All right, now hopefully your result is looking at least slightly better than that first line of stitches. So look at both sides of the fabric just as before and make an adjustment again if you need to. Now, this may take several rounds of testing and removing the needle plate and making a bobbin adjustment and putting it back together and sewing again. And that's very normal and it can be tedious, but you're not doing it wrong if it takes 5 or 6 or more tries. It just is a slow and steady process. But now the moment that your stitch looks balanced, we're gonna stop. Don't keep trying and making it more perfect. Balanced is the goal. You hit it, you're done. You could drive yourself mad going after absolute perfection. Now, once you go through these steps and you have a balanced zigzag stitch, we can confirm everything looks good by switching it over to a straight stitch. So go ahead, change your zigzag back to a straight stitch, sew another test line, check both sides. If you're only seeing the top thread on the top and only seeing the bobbin thread on the bottom, then congratulations, you did it. You have balanced stitches. All right, so from here, when you need to make a project-specific adjustment, we're not going to touch the bobbin tension. We are done touching the bobbin tension. But now that we have that calibrated baseline, we know that if we are starting at the middle point, that we only need to make a small increase or decrease to our upper tension to account for any differences in your fabric choice or thread weight. So when you're ready to make those project-specific adjustments, you're of course going to use a scrap of the fabric that you want to use for your project, as well as using the actual thread and needle that you plan on using as well. If you're sewing denim or canvas, or maybe you're working on a quilt with many layers, we're probably going to need to increase that upper tension from the baseline. And then for lightweight or delicate fabrics like silk or chiffon, that is a slight decrease to the upper tension. And then for stretch fabrics, please always make sure you are using the right needle first. You really need to be using a ballpoint or a stretch needle, or it's going to look like a tension issue when it isn't. And only once you have ruled out that you're using the correct needle for your fabric choice, then you can increase or decrease your upper tension if needed. Now, if you have gone through this full reset, you've tried everything and you are still not getting a balanced stitch, well, that's probably a signal that there is something else going on besides the tension. Possible causes at this point might be that maybe your hook or your bobbin case has been damaged, the machine's timing could be off, or your machine just might be due for service and could be packed with lint and old lubricant that is impacting its performance. So if you think that might be a possibility, it may be time to take your machine to your trusted local technician. And to my Metro Detroit viewers, you can find my business Seamswell. I'm based in Farmington Hills and would love to help you out. And if you are a committed DIYer and you really want to learn to service your own sewing machines, I hope you will consider joining me inside Sewing Doc Academy. Code Lisa20 gets you 20% off any program you choose. And if you have made it this far, please consider hitting subscribe. There's so much more sewing machine knowledge I am excited to share with you this year, so I hope you'll come back soon. As always, keep on sewing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.